Welcome to another fireside chat on leadership lessons brought to you by the Schulich Executive Education Center, or SEEC. We will be recording this conversation for those who are unable to attend today's live session or who want to revisit it afterwards. My name is Matthias Kipping. I'm a professor at Schulich, and it is my privilege to host this chat. I will start us off, but would also like to bring in questions that you might have. So please use the Q&A function during this conversation so that I have some idea of what you would like to talk about, and we'll try to feed that into the conversation. Our guest today, David Kincaid, who should appear on the screen shortly, is a marketing legend. That is at least the view of the American Marketing Association, which elected him to their Marketing Hall of Legends in 2013. He's definitely had a remarkable career in marketing, starting with senior brand management roles at American Express and General Foods, then went on to be a senior VP at Labatt's, where he was responsible for the expansion into the US, Mexico, and the Caribbean, and then as chief marketing officer at Chorus Entertainment, one of Canada's great companies in the entertainment industry. But then 20 years ago, I think now to the day almost 20 years ago, he decided that he had it with the corporate world and started his own consulting company called Level5 Strategy, which is and became one of, and today is one of the go-to places in Canada, if not North America as a whole, for brand creation and delivery. He has also published 3 books, the latest of which has just come out less than a month ago. And you can go out after this conversation and order one. And so the 3 books is, the last one is The Brand Difference CEO, the one before The Value of a Promise Consistently Kept, and the first one was Brand Forward, Brand Back. As if this wasn't enough, consulting, writing books. He also teaches marketing and branding at Queen's University Smith School of Business and here at SEEC. So he is definitely, I'd say, it's, the title of a legend is definitely justified. And, if you want to know about brands, he is clearly the person that's, one of the most knowledgeable and definitely very passionate about brands. And in addition, also about learning. That's, when you listen to him, he always stresses what you can learn. So we look forward to learn a lot from you, David. Welcome to this. And
thank you,
so what is this about brands? Why is this, become your passion? And, maybe we'll start off with a quick definition of what is a brand?
Well, it's a great opening question, and thank you for having me today. Much appreciated. It's always fun to take part in these fireside chats sponsored by SEEC. Yes. So a lot of people asked me that after I started Level 5, because I kept saying what a brand wasn't. People confuse brand management with marketing, and those are different concepts. You market a brand, but how you manage a brand and how you manage marketing are obviously very different things. So my passion actually came as a result of the great training that I had good fortune to have through a lot of those early training grounds like American Express and General Foods that you talked about. And I became quite disappointed when I started to see people confuse regularly the concept of brand management and marketing management. So I was running around saying what a brand wasn't for many years until one of my colleagues said, well, you might want to start saying what it is. So I fought with it. Everything, it was too complicated. I was using business language. It just wasn't making sense. And I woke up in the middle of the night, one night with one of those ahas. I said, you know what? Actually, great brands always create value. And we'll talk about that through today. But therefore, the definition of a brand is the value of a promise that's consistently kept. And that sounds like such an easy equation, such logic. But many companies either don't have their promise thought through properly to address the needs of the market, or they haven't set up their business system, its structure, its processes, its competencies to be able to deliver on that promise. And when you don't keep your promise, your value goes down. And that's why I thought it was a super simple, lots of layers underneath, but it was a simple answer to what a great brand was.
Yeah, and that's in one sentence, and you can sort of quite easily memorize that. So can you give us an example just to illustrate, what's, a brand that you personally, I mean, you've worked with certain brands and you've observed other brands. You created brands. I mean, you mentioned that already in the conversation we had. A brand that you admire, and then tell us why you think that that's such a great brand.
Well, I would say I admire brands along maybe three different continuums. Number one, much as the title just said, it's the brands that are most valuable in the marketplace and have been measured financially to drive value. And the big brands that are out there today, my good friends at Kantar have a brand valuation product called Brand Z here in Canada. And they just listed out the world's and Canada's top valued brands. And much as you'd expect, the brands that are there in that top 5 to 100, they represent $5 trillion of value.
Wow. Yeah.
And the top 3 or 4, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google. So the brands you would expect. And in Canada, RBC, TD, Bell, these are all very valuable brands because they have been proven to sustainably drive value for shareholders and for employees. The second piece of logic is that they are sustainable. This isn't a one-hit wonder. They have demonstrated an ability to drive that level of value over an extended period of time. And I'm talking decades, not 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. So the sustainability of brands is something that I view as a very important determinant. And then for me, the thing that makes me admire a number of brands is they've got that leadership who has a perspective that they are managing a brand, and they've got the courage to actually go in and change. They're constantly challenging their abilities, their promise in the market. And they've got that wonderful leadership skill that starts with asking a fundamental question: what business am I in? Mm-hmm. Not what do I make or what do I produce or what do I sell, but what business am I in? What value do I create? What benefits do I bring to the market? And, there are many great Canadian examples. Cirque du Soleil. If you tried to tell Guy Laliberté that he was in the circus business, he'd probably come across the desk at you. Like, he is in an all experience. It's an experience brand that is about entertainment. Crayola Industries, who I had the opportunity to work with. They're not in the crayons business. They're actually in the business of enabling creativity. Even age-old brands that have had the leadership wisdom to step back and relook those strategic questions, like Campbell's Soup. They're no longer in the soup business or instant food business. They've actually evolved their proposition to say, well, no, it's got to be more than that. We're in the nutrition business. So great brands drive value. They do it over an extended period of time, and they have a great track record of constantly going in and challenging that basic question of what business they're in and changing as a result of it.
So if that change that doesn't happen, then, a brand becomes stale and might, no longer, then the others, then it might no longer create value and so on. Is that how it works?
Very much so. And, I give in this new book, actually, I give a number of examples of brands who just did not keep pace with the speed of change that the market demands, let alone a pandemic influenced market demands. So if you're not out ahead, if you are not market led, as opposed to being product fed, if your business system is about simply what you make or what you produce, you might miss huge opportunities, because a lot of brands that are doing extremely well in Canada right now, and globally, are brands who actually have taken that opportunity to relook some of those basic strategic questions and say, where's the market headed and how can I create value going forward?
In that market that is changing that way. We'll come back to that, what the pandemic did to brands and does to brands. I just want to, at the moment, you take business examples, you take examples of companies, of some products that then again become, broader brands. What about brand as a personal brand? I mean, people sometimes say, hey, this is my brand. Or now, in the pandemic, we look at countries and people evaluate countries. So I always bring her up, but Jacinda Ardern as a personal brand, and New Zealand as a country, both done very well in this pandemic. I mean, can you extend that brand concept and your brand concept to things beyond business and products and services?
Well, by all means. You stole a great example. So,
Sorry.
Jacinda Ardern has become the gold standard. You look what she has done in terms of making a promise that's consistent with the needs of her country right now, and she has walked the talk. She's delivered on their promises. You look at the COVID situation. I mean, they basically have had that issue under control before it really started to rise anywhere else in the country. But beyond that, I mean, look over the last 24, 48 months, that devastating volcano, the mosque attacks, there's a lot that she has done, the gun control that she's put in place. She said these were needs or changes that the market demanded, and she put legislation in place or diverted funding to things like the relief on the volcanoes. So she keeps her promise. And so the exact same concept or framework exists, whether it's a personal brand, whether it's a country brand. And to drive my point home, I would challenge anybody who's aware of global affairs to hold up the Ardern brand against the Trump brand.
We had to.
I'm not going to get into
we
politics.
had to bring it up. We had to bring it up.
I'm not going to get into politics, but enough said. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
In just using those two names, I just took you in completely different places, emotionally and rationally. So they are brands. They're powerful brands, just very differently positioned. Let's put it that way.
Positioned. Though, it's always very often in the eyes of the beholder, how you see a brand. So for some, the Trump brand means, something different. And again,
exactly.
It's not ours, it's not up to us to comment on that. We'll see what the market thinks next Tuesday of that brand. Let's get back to business. So we talked about that promise. And again, I love that. I love that definition. The promise consistently kept, with the notion of having to adjust it as the market evolves and so on. So what about the pandemic? Can't imagine a bigger shock to the market than what's happened: shutdown, lockdown, and uncertainty going forward. Can you give us examples of brands that managed to keep their promise throughout the pandemic, or adjusted in a way that, because as I said, it's difficult to imagine anything, that impactful. So how have brands reacted to that? And again, I like examples. I like concrete.
Well, not only impacted, but you can't plan for the level of impact that this has created. So nobody could prepare for this. So, go back to what I would consider core drivers of a brand's equity, trust. So what creates value for many is trust and resilience. And I think, I use those basic platforms to kind of maybe as a foreshadow to brands that I've admired here in Canada, who have continued to grow their value despite being faced with the pandemic. And I'm going to throw out a couple that might surprise you. I would look at the whole grocery sector. So the Loblaws, the Metros, the co-ops, but one that I put a red circle around are our friends at Sobeys. Who would have thought even a year ago that the grocery industry would be considered an essential service? But because of what we've all been through, we now look at that experience when we go to a grocery store in a very different way. And the one thing that Sobeys did was they truly remained consistent with their core positioning, which has always been Canada's family grocer. So a lot of the changes that they made and were first to make, things like plexiglass, dividers, routing. I listened to Michael Medline, their CEO, speaking yesterday to the Empire Club about with the cold weather coming in, they're talking about doing new things to protect people who have to stand outside to be able to get into a grocery store. So they're always thinking about to the benefit of the customer. Another important element for me with Sobeys was they continued to invest in their brand despite the pandemic. So they were changing it even as we were all faced with lockdown. You know, their recent launch of their direct-to-home delivery program, their Voila brand, the partnership that they ran into with Okada out of the UK, a subject matter, a software platform, the automation, it's all robotic picks out of a central distribution center. Like they've continued to do what's right for the customer because they're Canada's family grocer, but it's innovated in a way that is relevant to what people look for today in a grocer. So they would be one that I would hold up as somebody that I've admired for those reasons. But one that might surprise you, Air Canada is somebody who I've got a lot of faith in. This pandemic has just absolutely obliterated their industry. Yet despite that, they have continued to build that loyalty with their passenger base, even when they can't buy an airline ticket because they can't travel. Their recent relaunch of their whole Aeroplan program, a loyalty program, not a frequent flyer program, but a loyalty program designed to drive loyalty to the brand of Air Canada. Their travel from home program, all of their points programs that I can now accumulate and earn and convert into air travel at some point, whenever I can. Let's face it, we will return to flying. We're a global citizen now. So air travel will be there, but they will be the airline, at least in our country, that survives. And I'm not trying to cast a shadow on the other airlines, but if I had to go long as an investor, as an employee, as a shareholder, I would go long with Air Canada because of the strength of the brand, despite everything that's been thrown at it.
Yeah, there's two extremes here, because one, you know, obviously on the grocery side, that's, you know, a necessity. We would have to, and then that buying experience, it's important because we see that every day. And the other one is really hammered completely by, you know, it stopped basically. You know, I haven't, you know, been to the airport in an airplane for the last 6 months.
And you know, I'll give you one last quick one. Lululemon. They've had their ups and downs, but they have continued to grow in brand value, in strength in terms of distribution in new markets. I found this interesting statistic: 86% of Lululemon's sales last year happened outside of Canada.
Okay.
So their brand and its equity travels. Strong brands are borderless, and they've demonstrated that. And they have fought back from some bad PR, but that notion of trust and resilience, they've continued to show and continue to grow. So you're right. I wanted to give you 3 examples of brands that I admire, all for the same reason, but they are dealt a very different hand of cards when they go to sit down at the table, and they've all allowed their brand to be the core asset that's allowed them to do that.
But the underlying drivers, you say, and the way they look at the brand ends up being very similar, even if they're different, you know, dealt a different hand of cards through the pandemic.
Exactly.
So has your thinking and should the thinking of CEOs managing their brands evolve as a result of the pandemic? Should we think of brands differently? I think at one point you mentioned, you know, the emotional connection, you know, to the brand is, you know, it's become over time more important. And has the pandemic accelerated that? I mean, you know, I always say this pandemic is a catalyst. It shows things that were there and, you know, exposes them more. In terms of brand, what is, you know, is there something that was kind of there, but now has become even more important?
Well, I think this was happening. Maybe it's just the change in the demography and the makeup of the consumer market, as it gets younger again. Those younger consumers were looking for a bigger reason to buy, simply over and above the product is good quality and it's at a good price. They wanted a bigger engagement with the brand and therefore an attachment. You had to earn their loyalty, and you had to demonstrate to them that they could trust you to get that loyalty. So those emotional factors, those drivers of a brand that you're talking about, I think have simply become more important. Now, in the face of the pandemic, where trust and responsibility and accountability of a brand to this higher emotional engagement is even put at a higher premium, it's become even more important. And that's why, if I had to, offer any perspective or insight, it's if you manage your brand and invest in building that brand's resiliency based on these core emotional drivers, it will take you past the pandemic. It will help you navigate the new norm, whatever that ends up being. But it does start with these emotional factors, your purpose, why you're in business, not just what you're in business to do. And that drives ethical behavior, the employee environment that you create, your supplier relationships. So that higher order purpose is something that I really do believe is going to navigate that next level of brand success coming out of the pandemic.
And you have seen companies that are already sort of on that track, were on that track before, that look at purpose and that higher order. And is that something you've seen already happening?
It is because you look at a business that even like a Loblaw. So go back to the Canadian grocer sector. They're in the business, as Galen Weston said quite compellingly, I thought, in his vision statement, of making Canadian lives better. So that's why we have access to this wonderful portfolio of food banners. That's why we bring you Shoppers Drug Mart, the largest pharma chain in the country. It's why we've got the deepest, richest database on your personal health and what your nutritional requirements are that these stores can help provide against. So they're being driven by a higher order purpose. So yes, this isn't new, but the pandemic has simply put a premium on a lot of these brands moving faster, moving more forward with that type of thinking.
So it's there, but it's kind of, as I said, probably a catalyst and an accelerator. I have a question here and I have two questions actually, and I want to both bring them up in the last few minutes we have. One is from Craig Nagel. Sorry, Craig. Can you apply that to smaller firms? You've all the examples you've given are big brands. Can you apply that the brand value promise to a smaller company? Like a boutique consulting firm, like yours. I mean, he gives that example, but can it be applied to a smaller firm that doesn't have the same advertising power, visibility of the bigger
Exactly.
brands?
Well, not only is Craig's question a good one, it's the question I'm being asked more and more these days. Let's face it, a small business drives our GDP. So why shouldn't a small business be able to brand itself? And the answer is there isn't. There is no reason why. And, I've watched it. I've had the chance to talk to a number of CEOs or small business owners recently as I've launched this book, and they're telling me fascinating stories. Redwood Classics, which is a wonderful first generation Chinese family, moved over. They started up a business that made a lot of private label t-shirts, sweatpants, and hoodies and things like that. Well, they had a wonderful business, like almost a $50 million a year business. And then the pandemic hits, and all they did was shift. Because they stayed market directed, they said, well, look, we have a lot of the materials that are required to make masks, PPE. And now I'm sitting on all this underutilized capacity within their manufacturing footprint because people weren't ordering as many hoodies and things. So they shifted the business, and they did it because they looked at it through the lens of a brand. They weren't worried about just what they made, because if that had been their kind of indicator, their key success indicator, all they would have seen is things going down. They said, no, we serve a higher order purpose, and we can do other things with our capabilities. And that, to me, is a great example. And look, our frontline workers, our essential care workers, get all of the credit they deserve. But you know what? I honestly believe another frontline essential care worker who's out there making a wonderful go of it are our restaurants. Here are businesses that have been put right up against the wall. And those that have built strong brands, loyalty in their, it could just be their local neighborhood, it could be a national chain. You've seen them change from simply offering a good menu at a good price to being something bigger than that. You know, they are a place where their community can meet and engage safely, get nutritious food. So they are thinking of themselves as a brand. Not all of them, but those that are surviving and doing well are. So yeah, small business can do it just as easily.
Just
same fundamentals.
Same fundamentals. And the second question does want to take us back to Trump. And, you know, I want to actually close with, you know, leadership questions anyway. So I'll give you that question. So how, you know, according to Jesse Waltman, who asked the question, you know, Trump in a way defies the definition of what you provide for a purposeful, successful brand, and still have a 40% plus market share. And we don't even know whether that, you know, it might be even more than that. Who knows? So how can you explain that? How, you know, is, again, probably not right to ask you that question.
Yeah, because now we're talking about the world of politics, not the world of commerce. But I've got a political science degree. That's my background.
There you go.
You know, the short answer is I can't. I can't answer, which means it won't last. What I'm concerned about is not Mr. Trump and his inability to keep a promise or to tell the truth or whatever. So I'm not worried about that. What I am worried about is the market, the community called the United States of America, who continues to vote him in, because they seem to be willing to place great value on a promise not being consistent like that. And, you know, he can point to things that he says he turned around the economy, he, you know, the lowest rates of unemployment, et cetera, but how much of that was really because of his policies during his term? He was riding the coattails of some success. So I can't explain it, but he's a wonderful marketer.
That's what I'm saying. Here is where marketing still kind of matters.
Great marketing can certainly create that breakthrough, but only time will tell. The equity of the Trump brand, we'll let the historians tell us what that looks like.
Since I'm a historian, you know, you can ask me in 30 years and we'll know better. But let's finish with leadership. Again, you put the onus for the brand and creating and delivering the brand on the CEO. He says it's really a CEO matter. And, you know, let's take that a little broader. So a great CEO, I mean, in your new book, you really focused on the CEO. What are the things a great CEO can do, and which of those things matter or have mattered in the pandemic? You know, I always like to say one, but I give you three things that you think are important things for a CEO who's a good brand manager and is generally a good leader. So the three leadership lessons, this is what this series is about.
Well, I'll give you the top three, and I'll squeeze in one to make it four very quickly. These six, I say there are 6 success factors for CEOs to manage their brand as an asset. But the ones that are, it's almost sequential. It starts with the perspective of the leaders. So it's a personal leadership statement, because they have to step back and say, you know what, we're more than simply a manufacturer or a provider of a service. We actually provide greater value in the market. So it starts between the ears of the leadership team and the CEO. But I'd say that key success factors, first of all, they do ask that great question you asked earlier about purpose. Why do we exist? Not just what do we make and what do we sell or how do we sell it, but why are we in business? What's that higher order value? Because that is what tomorrow's market, especially post-pandemic, I think is going to be looking for. So they can articulate purpose. The second is that they have a wonderful ability to create consensus. So they can, throughout their organization, the key people, the influencers, the decision makers, they can allow that brand purpose to socialize and unify an organization. The third, therefore, is that they create an accountability. They hold people, individual roles responsible for consistently delivering on that brand, but they hold them all accountable. So it's measurable. And there are penalties if you don't deliver on it. And the last quick one is they communicate over and over to the point where they're bored with it, but the market isn't. And they're effective communicators.
And that's, you say, is not just a question of managing a brand really well, but that, these are, features that also distinguish a great leader in the pandemic, independent of whether it's about a brand. Okay, let's finish with that. Thank you, David. This was wonderful. I appreciate you being with us, and I'm sure the audience has too. And, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has too. And I now know why you're called a legend. You've lived up to that promise. So thank you, David. And we'll hope to welcome you in what's coming up in the leadership lessons one more time, maybe, in the future. So look out, there'll be more leadership lessons coming your way. And thanks again, David, for a great conversation.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Bye. Thank you.